very cold in space.
Hi. Star Trek is famously a work that imagines a future where united humankind manages to scramble above their squabbling and reach out to touch the face of God. While not quite as utopian as some are quick to call it, one can hardly argue that Star Trek doesn't present us with a flattering reflection of who we are and who we could be. At its best, Trek challenges our own vaunted ideals of civilization and culture. At its worst, it's a campy, disjointed assemblage that shambled onto the airwaves week after week thanks to a beleaguered and oft unappreciated crew.
I'm Tweedledee, he's Tweedledum. Spaceman marching to and from. We slide among the mimsy trolls and gyre among the Boragos.
Sometimes the result was incredible, defying the odds that continued to mount against Gene Roddenberry's hippie fantasy of a sexually and intellectually liberated future time.
Now that's a Star Trek!
By and large, the body that encompasses Trek is impressive. It's no secret that the problem-solving episodic foundation of the property has taken a back seat to the spectacle of more fantasy-oriented sci-fi in the cultural zeitgeist. But right now, when every day sees me looking at a news story and quietly saying, "Oh my God," into my phone, the fantasy I want to pursue is less space knights with laser swords and more diplomats with careful, tested, and sound reasoning. There's a lot of misery in that sentence, and you can probably relate to it if you've stumbled across a video essay about Star Trek. Perhaps you wish that someone, anyone, could reach out and take away even some fraction of the weight you find yourself carrying. That's why we're here today. Let's talk about Meld. Meld is the 16th episode of the second season of Star Trek Voyager. It originally aired in February of 1996, directed by Cliff Bole, with writing from Michael Sussman and Michael Piller. It features series regular Tuvok, played by Tim Russ, initiating a Vulcan mind meld with a crewman named Lon Suter, played by Brad Dourif. The premise of Voyager as a whole is that the eponymous ship is caught up in space shenanigans and ends up shot to an entirely different, unmapped part of the universe than is known to the Federation, the governing body at the core of Star Trek. The show follows the crew of Voyager attempting to find their way back home through this unknown and frequently hostile part of space. An endeavor which takes a considerable amount of time and challenges them to uphold the ideals of the Federation while not under its scrutiny or care. Like all Star Trek, some of the individual stories chronicling the adventures of Voyager and her crew are brilliant and inventive science fiction, while others are by-the-numbers space stories.
79 episodes, about 30 good ones.
Meld is not a by-the-numbers space story, though it fools you into thinking it might be. Instead, it's an exploration of character for Tuvok, as well as a look at the consequences of a fairly common narrative device within the Star Trek universe. Let's start with the latter. The Vulcan mind meld is a bit of space mumbo-jumbo that dates back to the first season of the original Star Trek, specifically the episode Dagger of the Mind. In that episode, important information that could keep Captain Kirk from danger is essentially locked up in the addled mind of a tortured psychologist, which I believe is a bit of a redundancy. Initially, the meld is presented as something intimate that Vulcans keep to their private lives. Spock describes it here as a
hidden personal thing to the Vulcan people.
Essentially, a Vulcan can initiate contact directly between their mind and the mind of another life form, allowing both to see into the other's thoughts and feelings. The way this first meld is shot highlights its intimate nature, with actor Leonard Nimoy maintaining physical contact and whispering painfully alongside the fragmented thoughts of the subject. It's one of the times we get to see Spock outside his role as the anchor to Kirk's occasional impetuousness.
Captain Kirk speaks somewhat figuratively and with undue emotion. However,
here he's sort of a spiritual healer, something that became more common as the series continued. The mind meld is also kind of a writing crutch. Despite Spock's insistence that the meld is a thoroughly private affair, it would go on to be featured in about 11 more episodes. That means roughly 15% of the original series features the Vulcan mind meld, and I'll have you know that a couple instances of it being questionable whether or not an encounter was actually a meld have been excluded from my count, in true Trekkie fashion. Anecdotally, there are also melds in 5 of the 6 films featuring the original Enterprise crew. The frequency of its usage in the series' early days is what makes this particular Voyager episode so interesting. Rather than using the meld as a way to quickly gather or consolidate information, as it was most frequently used, it is what comes after that this episode chooses to focus on.
No, we just sort of looked at each other, and he did whatever he had to do, and I did what I had to do.
In the business, we call this foreshadowing.
A crewman aboard the USS Voyager has been naturally violent all of his life. He is a Betazoid, a species whose members commonly develop telepathic abilities at a young age. Many Betazoids display remarkable empathy as a result of this, notably Deanna Troi, the counselor aboard the Enterprise D in The Next Generation.
Well, he did make a pass at me last night. A good one.
Suitor, however, never developed much in terms of his own psionic abilities. This would certainly indicate an exclusion amongst his own people.
I don't seem to feel anything at all. Most Betazoids can sense other people's emotions. I can't even sense my own.
I argue it presents a natural path to joining an organization like the Maquis, the group of rebellious combatants that make up a considerable portion of Voyager's crew after its displacement into the Delta Quadrant. The episode begins as if it were to be a murder mystery. In engineering, a crewman's body is discovered and circumstances imply that his death was not accidental. Tuvok, as the ship's chief of security, takes the matter into his own hands. A murder aboard a ship with a limited crew and no real means to recruit additional hands is more than a big deal. Thing is, Suitor is presented as the only real suspect. Even his former Maquis compatriots fall just short of out-and-out pointing the finger at him immediately.
As a Maquis, he did what he had to do a little too well. As in?
As in killing Cardassians.
We run through the steps of a crime procedural swiftly. An accusation is indirectly presented to Suitor by Tuvok, DNA evidence is recovered by the Doctor that indicates Suitor's guilt, and Tuvok confronts Suitor with said evidence. Suitor confesses in a scene that is brilliantly handled by Dorff, who brings a powerful presence to this essentially one-off character.
No, there's no point in denying it anymore.
All of this happens before the second commercial break, encompassing the first of 5 acts. This was the 3rd Star Trek television series to follow a fairly strict storytelling structure. Each episode was roughly 45 minutes long, with 5 commercial breaks making up the other 15 minutes of airtime in an hour-long block of television. Usually, an episode would present a problem or concept to the audience within the first 6 minutes, inclusive of the title sequence, then proceed to tell that story across 5 acts separated by those commercial breaks.
I have the last slice.
Actually, you're only entitled to half.
Large is $9.90.
While this structure is certainly viable, it would be difficult to argue that it didn't feel formulaic by Voyager's 3rd season. The pattern had been established by The Next Generation in 1987 and was followed by Deep Space Nine and Voyager, meaning that episodic Trek had been doing things this way for 9 years by the time Meld originally aired. Part of what I like so much about Meld is that it's one of the episodes that plays with expectations that exist mostly because of that structure. Like I said, the original mystery angle is solved by the end of Act 1. Suitor confesses and does so with such calmness and detail that Tuvok is compelled to remind him that he's entitled to legal representation, which Suitor ignores. Finally, Tuvok tries to discern why Suitor did this in the first place. This quasi-interrogation scene is where Dorff really shines in the role. He says that he didn't have a reason, then relents and admits,
I didn't like the way he looked at me.
Well,
it's the second act of the story that establishes what this episode is really about. Act 2 sees Tuvok attempting to make sense of the crime itself, refusing to accept Suitor's explanation as a motive to commit murder.
You don't seem satisfied, Lieutenant.
No.
As a Vulcan, and as the chief security officer on board Voyager, he sees it as his duty to understand the logic of this crime. Despite the Doctor attempting to make it clear to Tuvok that these sorts of things can just happen, Tuvok approaches Suitor and asks him directly, again, why he killed the other crewmen. They banter a bit, but ultimately there is no answer to be had. Suitor is just like this. He says a line that I highlighted earlier, that most Betazoids can sense other people's emotions, I can't even sense my own. A bit of why I'm so fixated on this line is its subtext and context. Consider again what has been said, because it reveals two things about Lon Suitor. Number one, he is, by admission, devoid of the emotions expected of most humanoid species. Just like Vulcans, a culture that has valued emotional control so highly for so long that they are known as a stoic, emotionless people.
As hard as it may be for you to understand, that did not require any feelings on my part.
Suitor's condition is an anomaly, whereas the Vulcan state of being is achieved through years of mental discipline. Despite the roots being so different, the destination is similar. In a way, Suitor being unfeeling is what Vulcans aspire to through their personal regimes of logic and reasoning. Of course, no one would want to be compared favorably to a killer.
No.
And obviously, the Vulcan people don't intend to become so disconnected from the emotions of humanoids as to devalue life itself, but there is a similarity there, like you're seeing something through a mirror darkly.
Oh, I get it!
Number two, he's always been an outcast. He's a Betazoid, incapable of the empathy his species is known for. With such traits valued so highly in his culture, it's not difficult to imagine that Suitor never really fit in on Betazed. Perhaps this explains how he joined up with the Maquis, ostensibly a band of outlaws founded to fight an oppressive, militaristic, and slave-owning empire back in the Alpha Quadrant. But think about this. Even his Maquis commander expressed discomfort with how good Suitor was at killing people. In short, this exchange between Tuvok and Suitor tells us a lot about Suitor's character by virtue of where such a person fits in the often methodical structure of the Star Trek universe. As a standalone aside within the episode, it accomplishes the goal of telling us Suitor doesn't fit in. Taken within the greater context of the fiction, it tells us that he never had a chance to. Tuvok doesn't understand this situation. Not merely the why of it, but the how. It's alien to him that one could be naturally predisposed to violence to such a degree that a violent act could just spontaneously occur, lacking reason or purpose. As Robert Picardo's Doctor puts it, channeling more than a little DeForest Kelley.
Ah, yes, I see. How to close the case without understanding the logic of the crime. For a Vulcan, that would be a dilemma, wouldn't it?
Fortunately, Vulcans have a pretty tested method of understanding the thoughts of just about anything, be it giant space orifice or lava slug monster. Do you see where this is heading?
Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh! Are you gonna do a mind meld?
Tuvok proposes a mind meld with Suitor, offering it to him as a way to help control something that has ruled him for his entire life, something that has made him an outcast, something beyond his ability to reckon with as an individual. By merging their minds, Tuvok believes he will at last understand why Suitor committed the crime and, by consequence, share some of his Vulcan mental discipline with the crewmen. Suitor accepts, the two come close together, and Act 2 ends as Tuvok performs the meld. Act 3 is all about the consequences Tuvok faces as a result of melding with Suitor. Despite believing that he'll be able to suppress the urges connecting with Suitor will bring into his mind, Tuvok is affected by this exchange. In fact, he begins exhibiting troublesome behavior fairly quickly in a scene that really shows off the Voyager crew's chops as writers, videographers, and performers. Let's break it down. Tuvok approaches Janeway in her ready room to report that he's performed a mind meld with Suitor. It's pretty standard exposition. One character explains the plot to another, but take a look at this. Tim Russ is fiddling with his hands here, where Tuvok usually keeps them clasped behind his back or at his sides. Not to say Tuvok never puts his hands in front of himself, but he isn't one to fidget. It's something I didn't notice until watching this episode far too many times to write and edit this video. It's a subtle touch, so good that I didn't notice. But my brain did. This entire scene is about Tuvok revealing, subtly, that the mind meld has had an adverse effect on him despite his assumption that he would be fine. It's meant to communicate to the audience and to Captain Janeway that this matter is not proceeding according to plan. Janeway recognizes this in him because they're old friends, But because she respects Tuvok as both an individual and as her second officer, she allows him the benefit of the doubt. The thing is, these two characters and their shared history are deep enough that you can't summarize it well without sounding hokey, like one of them calling the other directly a good friend or whatever. A truth in television writing is that you can have stories and characters that build and develop over time, serialized narratives, if you will, but you also have to understand that any episode could be someone's first. Sometimes you have to tread, retread, and tread once more through established ideas or concepts. As an example, earlier in this episode, Tuvok asks if Suitor is aware of what a mind meld is, and Suitor says,
It's that Vulcan thing where you grab someone's head.
This opens the door to Tuvok briefly explaining a concept that, while commonplace in Trek, may be foreign to a new viewer. That can be easy to do with a concept, but difficult to do with a relationship. At the same time, you can't go deep into examples of what the Captain and Tuvok have been through together, because this is an episode of a syndicated television show. So you have to account for viewers seeing any particular season at least partially out of order. Keep in mind that our very modern concept of watching television shows straight through on demand was essentially a foreign idea at the time. The way this relationship is portrayed in this scene is so well performed by Tim Russ and Kate Mulgrew, but the way the camera is handled reinforces the subtlety of their performances and elevates them. This discussion is Star Trek at its finest, an emotional dilemma being faced by two characters with similar principles, but different reasoning, determining how the situation should proceed. The first tip-off is when Tuvok suggests that a solution to the problem could be execution.
Captain, he is prepared to die for his crime.
This is against the Federation's law and established principles, which Janeway in particular values highly. It catches her off guard for a moment, but she immediately realizes that something is wrong. The camera zoom here as she stands enforces that she is taking charge of the situation and bracing herself, like a captain should. Tuvok backs this up with logic, but simplistic.
I only mention it because of the extenuating circumstances, and because he feels it would be an appropriate punishment.
Extenuating circumstances, he says. He feels it would be an appropriate punishment, he says. Then, there's this moment where Tuvok makes an emotional appeal to Janeway.
Crewman Darwin's three sisters might not agree.
Something very out of character, not just for him, but for Vulcans in general. Unless something is wrong. There have been times Janeway has sought Tuvok's counsel, especially when she faces one of the myriad ethical dilemmas that define your job as a Starfleet captain. But this is different. Tuvok initiates. Janeway's reaction is perfect. The music fades up as she stares at Tuvok, then she breaks eye contact and has a tiny shift as if she's searching her thoughts. It's a look of realization and concern in uncertain proportion. She turns, the music bed is dark and quiet, but still plenty present in the mix.
How is Suitor since the mind meld?
At this point, she clearly has her suspicions, and a casual shift to the other side of the equation means she can camouflage them while still getting helpful information. Tuvok explains.
Quite calm and controlled. Clearly, the meld initiated some high cortical activity in his brain.
It's science. It's fact. It's numbers on a chart. That is what should be expected out of a Vulcan officer.
And you, Tuvok? Any adverse effects?
Janeway speaks with a knowing tone and a deadly Kate Mulgrew stare. She suggests he take time off, but Tuvok insists that he has the matter in stride. She catches him with a Captain classic, the last-second reiteration.
Take care of yourself.
And we close with another Trek trademark, the dramatic walk-away and zoom.
Now that's a Star Trek!
If it isn't obvious enough to the audience that Tuvok is unsettled, cut to the mess hall, where Neelix is being Neelix. Tuvok handles Neelix in a way that I gather the average contemporary Star Trek fan wanted to handle Neelix, which is to say, enacting some sort of sick, violent fantasy, what is ultimately a character whose only crime is that his comedic relief falls flat a little too often. And that he was dating a 2-year-old. Alright, I get it. Even though it's all revealed to be a simulation only moments later, it's still disturbing that Tuvok would do this at all. A thought we are left with as the third act closes and we're faced with an ad for Pepto-Bismol or whatever.
If you want that party, you should come upstairs now while the hostess is still awake.
Cosby Big Comedy Monday.
But let's talk about how Suitor is affected by the meld. We see him calm and collected as Tuvok continues to deteriorate. Tuvok is barely holding himself together, unable to look the crewmen in the eye by the end of their next scene together. Considering the tone of the interrogation scenes in the episode's first act, we can see how dramatically power has shifted because of the meld. Suitor's situation won't be permanent, as Tuvok reminds us, but in this moment, he is the one benefiting from all of this. The difference in how Suitor carries himself, even how he speaks, is dramatic. There's a bit of detachment here, I suppose a natural consequence of becoming any percent more Vulcan, but the main thing we see is control. Suitor is restraining himself. Look at that behind the back clasp. Chef's kiss. He's not gussied up, duded out, getting down, or where it's at. Not anymore. In contrast, Tuvok takes his last professional actions of the episode, confining himself to his quarters and deleting his own command codes so that he cannot let himself free when he is inevitably overtaken by the emotions he feels coming on. By the time Janeway is alerted and makes her way to Tuvok's quarters, they've been torn apart. At this point, we run into an issue with the writing that a lot of Star Trek falls into. We've spent almost all of our allotted time establishing a problem and why it's as bad as it is. Perhaps even seen an attempt or two at solving the issue go awry. But we're playing the back nine now, and this story has got to get wrapped up so we can get the script out the door and on to the next. It's a rush to completion that often leaves some sour taste in my mouth.
Yeah, it'll be released to your mom tonight.
Usually this taste has a specific flavor, in order of disgust: ass pull, technobabble, or the occasional breakthrough. Meld tastes like technobabble. The doctor says that this meld has gone so pear-shaped because of a possible incompatibility between the parts of the Vulcan brain that process emotional regulation and the parts of the Betazoid brain that allow for telepathy. Sure, why not? That's probably something we know about by now, but I'll give you that it's less a surefire thing that happens when a Vulcan and Betazoid meld, and more of an anomaly. But the solution is to remove Tuvok's remaining emotional regulation entirely, the resulting shock causing that part of his brain to spin back up in response. Why would it do that? What's more, if you have the ability to turn off emotional regulation, would it not make sense that you could turn it on again too? Let's assume it doesn't make sense, because it's science fiction and these sorts of in-the-weeds questions are where we move away from what a story is actually about and become wiki-minding pedants. I don't know about you, but I'm willing to let some parts of my fiction just be. However, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out how frequently Voyager stories hand-wave through their final act. It feels like a weakness in that particular writing room, but, truth be told, it's something you run into a lot with sci-fi and fantasy in general. The concept is sound, you've even come up with ways to justify what you want to accomplish, but some little thing here or there is going to keep you from reaching the finish line. And frankly, you need to cross that finish line. You get paid exactly no money for stories you don't write, so sometimes you just have to trust your gut, make something up, and move on with your life. I've done it, you've done it, everyone who has ever written a finished thing has done it.
Do you plead guilty? Double yes. Guilty. I will now carry out the sentence. Kiff, my gun.
On the upside, part of this scene's technobabble is the casual throwaway line that Tuvok's natural Vulcan telepathic abilities have been disabled as well.
I'm sorry, I had them disable your telepathic abilities too.
Because sure, we can also do that. But Tim Russ's delivery of the response line is filled with such vitriol that I feel cathartic release over how dumb that is through him.
Release the force field!
Just a stellar performance out of Tim in this one. Surprise, surprise, but the advanced medical tech that we're making broad assumptions about doesn't do the job we need it to do. Tuvok breaks free and goes on the hunt for Suitor. They meet in the dark and Tuvok threatens to execute Suitor for his crimes. Suitor waxes poetic about the nature of violence. How it's used to punish the violent is itself a logical practice, but that these acts perpetuate a cycle that never ends. He warns Tuvok that killing him will not free the lieutenant from his demons unless they both are killed, in which case the urges will have nowhere left to go. Tuvok initiates a second meld, echoing an earlier assertion that a meld could be lethal.
It seems to me that a mind meld might be fatal if you lost control.
But in the middle of it, as Suitor seems to surrender to the inevitability of his death, Tuvok realizes what is happening and breaks the meld off prematurely. He collapses, and Suitor calls for help. The doctor explains that Tuvok's restraint is good, representative of their plan to reinitiate his emotional regulation being successful. Janeway and Tuvok share a quiet moment in sickbay, reaffirming their friendship, though Janeway makes sure to assert her command and tell Tuvok that he is not to meld with anyone else without authorization. No brain sex without the boss lady say so, which is definitely by the book, Starfleet. A warm smile, executive producers Rick, Michael, and Jerry.
That's a Star Trek!
Ultimately, Tuvok's plan to impose his way of life onto what he perceives as chaos only opens himself up to the same disorder he tried to control. It's a classic, watching someone's valiant effort to right some cosmic wrong turn around and bite them. It's like watching someone have a monkey's paw or a genie just fall into their lap. In fact, because the mind meld is ultimately just magic but in space, it's exactly like that. That's the thing about a mind meld. It's mysterious despite its practitioners' insistence on reason, a contradiction that can't really be divorced from any story featuring it. In many stories, it's space magic that allows the plot to advance, no different from any other complicated plan explained with a simple analogy.
Like putting too much air in a balloon!
But the fact that this particular device has been used so many times over the years makes it inherently more interesting. It's the ultimate expression of unity, literally combining the thoughts of two beings into one amalgam. In a way, a mind meld is a raw distillation of what the Federation wishes to accomplish as a whole. Mutual understanding that unites different creeds, cultures, and characters. But, of course, there are consequences in an act so powerful. Usually, we just see the pained expression of a Vulcan character before the meld is broken and ultimately the story moves on. In Meld, however, we are challenged to reckon with the natural after effects. Sort of like seeing something terrible and sitting with your emotions afterwards. You can become a different person in your own head. And that's without space magic. So what did we learn today? A couple things, I figure. For one, violence is a natural occurrence in our world, and sometimes there's no explanation for it. This is a different kind of violence than Star Trek usually portrays, which is part of why it's so interesting. Suitor isn't an alien who is so above the existence of regular humanoids as to not care about their well-being. He also isn't fighting for self-defense, self-reliance, or self-aggrandizing. He's just a person with violent tendencies and no outlet, trapped in a big airplane hurtling through space for years on end. Even with some shore leave, 3 years is a long time to be on one ship heading in one direction, without getting into the added difficulty of being an impossible distance away from everyone and everything you've ever known. Even though people like Suitor exist, and we may have our lofty Starfleet-esque ideas of why such behavior can exist, you can't just explain away violence, or even understand it, really. Violence just is, whether we like it or not. We all evolved from predators.
Well, not me, of course. I've just been programmed by you predators.
But also, we've learned the value of not assuming how to correct behavior we find unacceptable. Even in a situation like this, where the behavior is definitively, societally, unquestionably wrong, in the end, what Lon Suitor needed, more than anything else, was carefully prescribed and planned mental health care. Tuvok's space magic mind meld was a miracle cure, and arguably, it worked. But the consequences of someone as capable of violence as Tuvok being given violent tendencies as a side effect of his original intention are numerous.
I have counted the number of ways I know of killing someone. Using just a finger, a hand, a foot. I had reached 94 when you entered.
When we try to make other people into what we think they should be, we often become monsters. The act of change, especially when directed at an individual, can be a violent one. Suitor says it best when he reflects on the mind meld.
In a way, a mind meld is almost an act of violence, isn't it?
I don't understand why you would...
Penetration. Your will dissolving mine. The joining.
It's a weapon or a tool, depending on the hands that wield it. Empathy in general, something most Betazoids know a bit more about than Suitor does, is like that. It's someone else's perception, merging with your own. Their words, their experiences joining you and shaping your thoughts, your feelings. Whether we observe the meld as a representation of what the larger government in the Star Trek universe is attempting to do, or as something as personal and intimate as Mr. Spock first claimed it to be in 1966, there's no question that it's powerful. What's scary about it, and something this episode portrays very well, is how that power can get away from you even when you're operating under the best of intentions. I don't believe Tuvok intended to overwrite Suitor with a more Vulcan-approved version of himself, or that he wished to assimilate Suitor into a more societally acceptable way of being. But even if that wasn't his intention, it is what he set out to do. He wielded the meld as a club when he had intended to use it as a scalpel. Today, as I stare at my phone and read about the dead and dying being abused by forces that they put their trust into, I'm thinking about Tuvok and Suitor. I'm thinking about how often I've wished I could just touch minds with someone and share feelings, something I can never quite capture with my words. I'm thinking about how many times I've desired exactly the thing this story tells me is dangerous. And I'm sitting here with all of those feelings, considering how it's right. Taking shortcuts to understanding often doesn't lead to understanding at all. Rather, it leads to yet another step in an ongoing exchange of power that keeps so many of us balanced precariously on the edge between purpose and reason. Keeps so many of us in doubt as to who we are, or what we're doing, or why we're doing it. Something that I think certain parties are all too keen to perpetuate. Parties whose primary interests include exploiting us, making us take on their correct way of being, even if it means shorter and less fulfilling lives for us. To you, who may be seeing this video in a similar time of uncertainty, or anxiety, or outright fear, to you, I wish the same thing I wish for myself and my people. That we may live long and prosper. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, clicking the like button, subscribing, or leaving a comment really does help the channel. If you could share it with someone, that would be even better. And if you'd like another cold one, then maybe try my video on Elden Ring for non-Souls people, or this other video that Daddy Google thinks you might enjoy. Peace.